Lord, everywhere present, and fillest all things, treasury of blessings, and giver of life. Come and abide in us, and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls with good. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. And glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
I'm going to begin with just a simple overview of what is the Unia, and it's also called the Byzantine Catholic, Eastern Catholic, or Greek Catholic Church. Now, this church is in full communion with Rome. And we have, if you look at the history, it has in common with the Orthodox Church in Antioch, Jerusalem, Constantinople, Byzantium, its distinct heritage, and it's characterized originally with the Greek language culture, the Byzantine rite liturgy, like St. John Chrysostom and St. Basil. So it was the same, and they came from the Orthodox. Now, of course, you understand the Great Schism of 1054, which is when the church from the west gave a bull of excommunication to the church of the east, and all of the patriarchies, including Antioch, Jerusalem, Constantinople, etc. And they kind of looked at it as almost kind of a joke, because this Cardinal Umberto came up, and during liturgy, plowed up through the aisle, if you can imagine the great cathedral, and placed the bull of excommunication on the altar and was stormed out. They read it, it says, "You're all hereby excommunicated from the Pope of Rome." And they went, "Who do you think he is, another patriarch?" So they kind of threw it away, and they didn't worry about it. It was a couple hundred years until it was really embedded upon. If we read about St. Gregory Palamas, for example, he was already debating, this was already in the 1300s, he was debating against the Bartholomeus, who was an Italian monk, or Barlaam, but anyway, but you had antecedents up where we saw the West growing away from the East in St. Photius the Great. They called it the Phocian Schism. Now, Photius didn't do anything. He sent missionaries up to Bulgaria, and the Pope of Rome sent missionaries at the same time to Bulgaria. And the Orthodox or Eastern, again, they were all united in communion. They noticed that the missionaries sent from Rome were using a flat wafer. They weren't using the leavened bread. And they simply said, "Oh, wow, why do you do that?" They said, "Well, it's easier. We just kind of like, it's compact. It doesn't go, you have to bake constantly when you have communion, etc. We don't need to stay longer. And we just have been doing this." And so they reported back to Patriarch Photius the Great, who was one of the pillars of Orthodoxy. And he said, "Well, we really can't. There's a problem here." So he wrote to the Pope of Rome, mail didn't go really that quickly then, almost like, and, a couple of months later he says, "Why are you people using unleavened bread?" And the Pope writes back, he says, "Why not?" Then the next letter, meanwhile, this is going on for a couple of years. And finally he writes back, he says, "Because Christ is risen, we use the risen bread, and this is what we've always done." Pope said, "Oh, okay, well, we'll go back to doing that, I understand." And they did for a while, but then they stopped doing this. Anyway, they were, the origins, according to the Byzantine Catholics, they say the church's foundation lies with the apostles who spread Christianity to Greek-speaking areas, establishing communities in Antioch, Asia Minor, and Greece. They say in Constantinople, the move of the Roman capital to Byzantium, Constantinople, made it a major Christian center where the Byzantine Rite, with its unique liturgy and theology, evolved. This is the Greek Catholic explanation, not our explanation. They had missionaries, St. Cyril and Methodius, In the 9th century brought this Eastern tradition to Slavic peoples, influencing future Eastern Catholic traditions, formation of the Byzantine Catholics and union of Rome. They say the Byzantine Catholic Church, as known today, largely formed from efforts to bring Eastern Christians into union with Rome, often from Eastern Orthodox groups, particularly in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the Ruthenian tradition, a significant part of this movement, involved Ruthenian, which are Carpatho-Russians, immigrants from Eastern Europe, and established Greek Catholic parishes in the U.S. in the late 19th century. They have distinct practices. These churches kept the Eastern customs, the icons, iconostasis, married priests, but there was a caveat there, but acknowledged the Pope, initially called Uniatism, in the United States. In immigration of Carpatho-Russian immigrants, established parishes, building communities in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the Midwest, bringing their rich heritage. And there was a clerical uproar. The presence of married priests from Europe caused conflict with the Latin Catholics in the U.S., leading to decrees restricting married clergy for new immigrants, causing some defections to Orthodoxy. See, Alexis Todd is one of those. Modern identity. Today, the Byzantine Catholic Church in America, for example, the Metropolitan Church of Pittsburgh, is a diverse, non-ethnic body within the Catholic Church, preserving its Eastern faith and traditions. So they kind of think that they are Orthodox, but they're not. If we read the full, and I won't read it here because it's many pages, the full text of the Union of Brest-Litovsk, this took place in 1595 to 1596. It was a decision of a number of Orthodox bishops in the region of what is now modern Ukraine, Poland, and Belarus, to depart from the Orthodox Church and place themselves with the Pope of Rome in order to avoid being ruled by the newly established Patriarch of Moscow. Now, one of the things to remember here is in the original Unia, these Orthodox bishops that went under the Pope of Rome, they were promised that they could keep their married priesthood, which they did, and the filioque, they pointed out, they did not believe in the filioque, the double procession of the Holy Spirit. It was one of those articles in the full text of the Union of Brest-Litovsk that they specifically said, we're not going to say the filioque, we're going to keep to the original Nicene Creed. And Rome said, go ahead, but you will put it in parentheses in your church books. So that was something that was sort of, eventually you're going to be saying, you're going to kowtow to what Rome says. And now in Eastern Europe, it wasn't advisable for the church, for the Roman Church, to make it Latinized, directly Latinized. But in the United States, they took that opportunity to do so, and I lived through that as a young man, because I came from the Union Church. First of all, there was the papal ban on, I've got to find the page, there was a ban on the marriage of priests. It was in 1929, Vatican made a codex. They said they have to not be married anymore just in the United States and in South America, Canada, and in Australia. In the old country, such as Eastern Europe, they were allowed to remain married. In the late 90s and early 2000s, they were allowed to have married priests. In old country, come over and serve here. Now, we had, for example, when I was a kid, my grandparents, the priest that married them, Father Mankevich, was married. They had a pani or matush, what they call pani, in Carpatho-Russian or Slovak language, pani. So, he had a wife, but he was ordained before 1929. After 1929, there was a papal edict to pacify the Roman Catholics, no more married priests in the United States, Canada, South America, Australia. No more. But in old country, they knew that they would have they would simply go back to the Orthodox Church. Okay? So what happened was they had that for a time. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, John Paul II said, you can now have priests come from old country, Europe, Eastern Europe, to come to the United States, and they are allowed to be married and have children. Now, after 1929, don't think that people from here went to Prešov or to the monasteries, seminaries there. They came back and they said, oh, this is housekeeper, this is my cousin. It was really their wife. They went and got married, they came back, and that was the way that worked. And then, I mean, the big kibosh was put on that in the 1940s. And it was then that the Latinization of the church began. This is the church I grew up in. And at the beginning, this was the original iconostasis. Okay? It was beautiful. Now, it's said, quietly, that Orthodox priests would come and they would pay rent, and they would bring antimins, and they would have, for the Orthodox people, they would have services. This was done, also according to my great-grandfather, this was done in a place called Nizhny Slovenki, in what is present-day Slovakia. And I think it's in Slovakia. But you can see how Orthodox this looked. You couldn't tell the difference. You would look at this iconostasis, you would look at this interior, you would say, that's Orthodox. Okay? So, and they try to keep that. So they try to keep to their original Brest-Litovsk ruling. You could say the Filioque, you could not say it. You could have marriage priests, but then they said you can't by 1929. By the 50s. Now, even the bishops at that time in the 50s, even though they were Greek Catholic, they weren't dressed as our bishops. They were dressed as Latin bishops. And this one, Stephen J. Kochisko. Now this man here, Father John Bobby, baptized me. Okay? They were very Roman in appearance. However, this man was very much Eastern Rite. He really, and when he came to serve as bishop, this man, Father Most Reverend Stephen J. Kochisko, served in Orthodox bishops' residence, not in the Latin Rite. So they were sort of it was almost like you were growing up in both worlds. You had the expansion of the church, yet they maintained the original iconostasis. Okay, it wasn't until the late 50s they were told by Rome, and most Byzantine Catholic churches were told to expand and start to Latinize. So this is the same iconostasis, but you see where they took out the royal doors and the deacon doors and add statuary. See how they did this. So this one, when I was growing up, so it was sort of a schizophrenic experience, really, because you didn't know whether you was Catholic or Orthodox, but you were called Greek Catholics or Byzantine Catholics. So you see what they did. How the outside still looked the same. At the cupola had the 3-bar crosses, but they began to Latinize us. And by the 1970s, it was in full bore, the Latinization. They took away, they said no more Vespers, and no more pre-sanctified liturgy. You will have Stations of the Cross, you will have adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. You see how they did this? Now they kept the icons, but they spread them out and they opened that up like a Roman church. And they added statuary. So you had a number of people knew the difference. They were saying, this was very sudden. From the 50s to the 60s, all of this was done. And I was born in 62, so I don't remember the Holy Anastasis, but my dad did. Now, my cousin, Father Stefan Meholick, who's in San Anselmo, he's a minor archpriest now in the Orthodox Church. He went to seminary. He went to St. Cyril and Methodius in Pittsburgh. And St. Cyril and Methodius, very good seminary. And many people went there. And each young man that went there, they were doomed to be celibates, because that was the edict from 1929. You wanted to be a priest, even in the Greek Catholic Church, you had to be a celibate. So young Stephen Meholick from Du Bois goes there, and Father Rodion Pfeiffer, Father Theodore Shonsky, and there were a few others that went there, and they went to the library and they began to research, and they had classes of the ancient church. They studied the fathers, the ante-Nicene, Nicene, post-Nicene fathers. They began to question the union, or what is called why did these Orthodox people go back, or not back, but to the Roman Catholics? Because the teaching was, the Roman Catholics from the beginning of the schism said that they held all of the power in the Pope. They didn't need the other bishops in Sobor or in council to have an ecumenical council. They wanted to have more. Okay, and they decided things without the rest of the church from that time on. And at the point was like, they said, well, why do we have all these Orthodox traditions, and then we have them, then all of a sudden they're Latinizing us. But there was one big mistake. They had Second Vatican Council. And what that did was they took away their own traditions from the Latin Church. They had Vespers, they had Matins, they had beautiful Tridentine Mass. It was almost identical to the Divine Liturgy. I mean, it was just, and they had a Gregorian chant, 7 tones like we have. There was nothing unorthodox about the ancient Western Church. They were very Christian, and they were, of course, there was one church, united under Christ. But in 1054, because of these things, you know, we had the Phocian, they call it the Phocian schism about the wafers. They had, even before they split from the rest of the church as we see it, they had compulsory celibacy for all the parishes. Now, this was easy. You had lots of monks and lots of nuns. And you could take the monk or the person that vowed celibacy, put him in the parish. Well, he's one person. You don't have to pay him as much. You don't have kids, you know. And the nuns, they took a vow of poverty. They taught in the Catholic schools. So when I grew up, I went to the Catholic school. I went to public school too, but often I went to Catholic school. And the nuns taught, and the Franciscans taught, and they didn't get paid diddly squat, but they did a good job. They were good educators, I must say that. But this idea of compulsory celibacy to serve out in the public parishes went even before the Great Schism in the 9th century, so 800s. Okay, one of the arguments of the Unia was that St. Cyril and Methodius, and this is true, I mean, they came up first before the baptism of all of Rus, 100 years before. But they were sent as missionaries to barbarians, which were our people, who were living in trees and worshiping lightning and painting ourselves blue and all this stuff. And they came up and they kind of civilized us, you know. We were tribal. And, you know, the Slavs, if you call them, or Bulgarians, of course, where this happened first, not through. So there was no schism yet. When Cyril died, St. Cyril, he did the Cyrillic alphabet. He happened to be visiting people in Rome, in Italy, and he died. And he was buried in St. Clement's Church, in the original church, which is now in the basement of St. Clement's Church. I had the opportunity to be there this past May. I was in St. Clement's Church, and it's only maybe 2-3 blocks from the Colosseum in Rome. And so they had services constantly there. And they're, of course, I forget what kind of monks they are, but they are Roman Catholic, but they have a big reverence for St. Cyril. And I got to go down and venerate where he's buried. It was very moving. But the Romans will say, they said to the Uniatism, they said, well, even Cyril, who gave you your alphabet, is buried in Rome, so you should come home to Rome. See, this was a false pretense. So, yes, he's there, but there was no schism. When he just happened to be visiting, he died there. They didn't have okay, let's ship the body home, they buried you where you died. So that's what they did. Ironically, of course, I walked around Italy, and I had a letter from the Archbishop Meholick, letter of introduction, because I would serve him to a Orthodox church or whatever. But even the Roman Catholic Church respected that letter. I went into St. Mark's in Venice, where my patron saint is buried, St. Mark the Evangelist. And this little lady come up to me with a uniform, and I'm dressed like this, of course, in the church. I'm going to go big. And they have, you can see with this in the great basilica, it's like the iconostasis. And he's in the altar, he's buried in the altar. So I'm going back, and I saw lay people go back there. And she said, you have to pay $60, Father. I said, no, I have a letter, I can go. And I saw this man sitting at a desk, he looked more important than she. So I went and I said, look at this. And he looked at me and said, he can go any place he wants. So I went up and I got to venerate and be in the presence of my patron saint. But you can see in some of these great old churches in Italy, you can see where they were once Orthodox, where they had iconostasis, where they had all these things that they had. But the union was a strange thing. And it started with the Union of Brest-Litovsk way back in the 1500s. And that's what they did. And so you had sort of this casting together of the Eastern and Roman, not so much in Europe, but they waited until it was embedded in the United States. Now, Father Alexis Toth, who was a Union priest, he was married, of course, and they had one child, and both the child and the Pani died. Her name was Rosalia Meholick. So she shared my name. Okay? So he comes over thinking he's going to go to Minneapolis, and at that time there was no Byzantine Catholic eparchy. There was no representation, but he was told a lot of people came to this country. And he was asked to go to this church in Minneapolis, and he went and met with the Bishop John Ireland. And Bishop Ireland was Roman Catholic. The only language they had in common was the Old Latin. Now, Father Alexei knew all these languages. He was a professor at Prešov Seminary, and he knew Latin fluently, and so they argued with one another. And he said, wait a minute here. You're saying you're a widower? He said, yes. He said, so you were widowed, you lost your child, and you took holy orders. He said, no. I was married, I was ordained, we had the child. He says, when I was a married priest for years, and then the child died, and then my Pani died, and so here I am to take care of my people from Slovakia, or Austria-Hungary in those days. Oh my God, if you read, you can look it up. You want to hear language, and they translated from the Latin. And St. Alexis says, he said, well, we began to exchange words. He said, I don't think I should put down some of the words we exchanged.
What was the date for this?
1890 something.
So this is before the 1929.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, it was even before that. But it was one of the reasons for that, because these people were coming over from Eastern Europe that were under Rome, and some of them kept their wives in tow and their children. And these Roman Catholics were nuts. They said, you can't have this. They had a married priesthood since the 9th century in the West. And they said, you can't possibly be under Rome. You're like those Orthodox people. No, we're not. We're under Rome. And there was a big misunderstanding. Well, this is what led Father Alexis taught to Orthodoxy. He began to study why the antagonism against us so much. Why is this so horrible, to the Roman Catholics? Of course, he was, I'll just read you a little bit about his life. Our Holy Father Alexis, the defender of the Orthodox faith, he was a zealous worker in the Lord's vineyard. He was born in Austria-Hungary on March 18, 1854, into a poor Carpatho-Russian family. Like many others in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Toths were Eastern Rite Catholics. Alexis's father and brother were priests, and his uncle was a bishop in the Uniatism Church. So his uncle was even a bishop. He received an excellent education and knew several languages: Carpatho-Russian, Hungarian, Russian, German, Latin, and a reading knowledge of Greek. He married Rosalia Meholick, a priest's daughter, and was ordained on April 18th, 1878, to serve as a second priest in the Uniatism parish. His wife died soon afterwards, followed by their only child. So she died first, and he had the only child, losses, which the saint endured with the patience of Job. In May 1879, Father Alexis was appointed secretary to the Bishop of Prešov and also administrator of the diocesan administration. He was also entrusted with the directorship of an orphanage. At Prešov Seminary, Father Toth taught church history and canon law, which served him well in his later life in America. St. Alexis did not serve long as a professor or an administrator, for the Lord had a different future plan for him. In October 1889, he was appointed to serve as pastor of the Union Parish of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And like another Abraham, he left his country and his relatives to fulfill the will of God. Upon his arrival in America, Father Alexis presented himself to the local Roman Catholic diocesan authority, which was Archbishop John Ireland, since there was no Union bishop in America at that time. Archbishop Ireland belonged to the party of American Catholics who favored the Americanization of all Roman Catholics. His vision for the future was founded on a common faith, customs, and the use of the English language for everything except liturgical celebrations. Naturally, ethnic parishes and non-Latin Rite clergy did not fit into this vision. Thus, when Father Toth came to present his credentials, Archbishop Ireland greeted him with open hostility. He refused to recognize him as a legitimate Catholic priest or to grant permission for him to serve in his diocese. As a historian and professor of canon law, Father Toth knew his rights under the terms of the Unia, going back to the rest of the thoughts, and would not accept Archbishop Ireland's unjust decisions. In October of 1890, there was a meeting of 8 of the 10 Unia priests in America at Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, under the chairmanship of Father Toth. By this time, the American bishops had written to Rome demanding the recall to Europe of the Unia priests in America, fearing that Unia priests and parishes would hinder the assimilation of immigrants into American culture. Unia bishops in Europe refused to listen to the priests' pleas for help. Archbishop Ireland sent a letter to its parishes ordering their members not to attend Father Toth's parish, nor to accept any priestly ministrations from him. Expecting imminent deportation, Father Toth explained the situation to his parishioners and suggested it might be best for him to leave and return to Europe. No, they said, let's go to the Russian bishop. Why should we always submit ourselves to foreigners? It was decided to write to the Russian consul in San Francisco in order to ask for the name and address of the Russian bishop. Ivan Mlinar went to San Francisco to make initial contact with Bishop Vladimir. Then in February 1891, Father Toth and his church warden, Paul Podani, also made the journey. Subsequently, Bishop Vladimir came to Minneapolis, and on March 25th, 1891, received Father Toth and 361 parishioners into the Orthodox Church of their ancestors. The parishioners regarded this event as a new triumph of Orthodoxy, crying with joy, "Glory to God for his great mercy." Of course, the rest is history with Father Alexis. Many parishes, including my own in Uri, was brought under the teachings of Father Toth. Even though that church was established after his death, the people still remember what he taught. In Arcadia, which is about maybe 3 miles from Uri, is it used to be a Byzantine Catholic church, and I think it's just empty, and there are some people who serve once in a while. But the people from there went and established, they bought what was a general store in Uri, and they added the altar and the bell tower to it, and the windows. And so in, I think, 1917, it was commonly called in this area, especially this area in eastern Pennsylvania, because a lot of the people came from the Unia, and they knew what the word Catholic meant, not just established, the Roman Catholics, or like the Roman called themselves the Universal Church. But you'll see on a lot of the stones, including the Uri, it says St. Peter and Paul's Russian Orthodox Greek Catholic Church is on the cornerstone. So you're going to find a lot of this going on. Now, it wasn't lost on the popes that a lot of people, including my cousin and other people, were becoming Orthodox long after Father Toth blazed the trail for the Unions. Now, there was a papal lifting of the ban of the married priests in the Unia for officially. In 2014, Pope Francis lifted the ban on ordaining married men in the priesthood for Eastern Catholic churches in the diaspora. That is the U.S., Canada, Australia. Well, bishops must inform local Latin Rite bishops. Eastern Catholic or Byzantine churches may now ordain married men as priests, though they cannot marry after ordination like us, or become bishops. I don't know if their Pani dies, maybe they can become a bishop, but we have the same rule. However, if, say, a Matushka dies, then the person can become a bishop in our church. But notice that even though the Eastern churches, the local Eastern bishop has to inform the local Latin Rite bishop, still to this day, he has to tell the Latin Rite bishop, okay, we're going to ordain this man. He's married and his children. So, recognition of tradition, the Vatican officially recognizes the long-standing Eastern tradition of allowing married clergy as upheld in the Code of Canons of the Eastern Churches, Canon 373. These are the Latin canons, these are the papal canons. Removal of restrictions. Previously, the Vatican restricted the ordination of married men to traditional defined patriarchal territories. In 2014, Pope Francis lifted his restriction for diaspora communities, allowing for the pastoral care of faithful in countries like the U.S. and Australia. There was conditions for ordination. Candidates must be married before ordination, just like us. If ordained, they cannot marry again. Episcopal restrictions. Married priests cannot be ordained as bishops to the episcopacy. Well, same with us. That's how he does. Local governance. While the Vatican regulates these rules, Eastern Catholic bishops hold the authority to ordain married men to the priesthood to serve their communities. This shift is considered a restoration of an authentic ancient practice for Eastern Catholics. So it went on. First they had to tell the Latin authorities, but now they can just do it. A friend of mine in Sykesville, he was born here in Stroudsburg, and his wife was born in Pittsburgh, and he is the first Byzantine Catholic priest I know that born and his Montescorpani in this country that were ordained by the Greek Catholics or the Byzantine Catholics. Now, that's good news for them. Bad news for us, because we, as Orthodox Christians, often, a lot of the reason why we got seminarians from the Byzantine Catholics was because of that. But if one really researches the fathers and the reasons for the Great Schism, and we find the heresies that not only established that schism in 1054, but subsequently built up upon those things like the Immaculate Conception, the papal infallibility, things that were never actually ratified. Papal infallibility, I think, came in 1875, Immaculate Conception 1880 something. St. Catherine of Siena, who was considered a doctor of the Latin Church, I believe in the 1500s, I could be wrong. But she went up against one of the popes who wanted to enact the doctrine of Immaculate Conception again. And she, as a nun, she said no. And she's one of the most famous Catholic saints. She said, She goes, you're demeaning Virgin Mary. You make her into sort of like, she had to say yes. Where's her free will? We are made in God's image and likeness. And this is very orthodox. So we have free will. Even Virgin Mary had free will. Of course, especially her. You know. So when she said, I don't understand, to the Archangel Gabriel, I don't understand how this is going to be, knowing that I don't know a man. But be it done unto me according to thy word. In other words, faith fills that void. The Immaculate Conception doctrine says that she was predisposed, predestined to say yes. She couldn't have said no. Well, yeah, she could. Adam and Eve could have said no to the animal too. But they had free will. And so, God doesn't take our free will from us because we're made in His image and likeness. So, we can look at the niceness, if we look at the whole history, and I could bore you for 3 hours, which I'm not going to do, I know you all have to. But I could read the entire 30 articles of the Unia of Brest-Litovsk. And it is very well laid out. And most of what they were allowed to do was to basically remain outwardly Orthodox, even to the point of not saying the Filioque and the Creed, even to having married priests. But they had to be under the Pope and in communion. And what we mean when we're in communion is we have to profess the same faith. We cannot be in communion with people that profess something other than the truth that Christ gave to His apostles and passed on to the bishops. So, we can very nicely say, and I believe me, Byzantine Catholic priest, even the Metropolitan, and he left. And this, again, and this was Metropolitan Justin Prosek. Okay. He was the dean of St. Cyril Methodius Seminary back in 1971, 72, when my cousin and several others left and they went to his office. They said, we're going to St. Deacon's. We're going to become Orthodox. And you know what he did? He said, I understand. He did not yell at them. He said, I wish you would stay because there's this idea we can go back to Orthodoxy from within. But like St. Alexis taught says, no, we have to set the example ourselves by becoming Orthodox first. Then we cannot live in a lie, we cannot live in the doctrines of the papal authority and then work from within because we are united in communion with something that isn't true. So, even though Prosi says, I understand, he said, I wish you'd stay, but I do understand, I understand why you're leaving. And they left. And he said, go with my blessing. Imagine this? So, fast forward, this must have been in the early 90s. And he's dead now, but he was the metropolitan. And I went down to my church where I grew up, the Byzantine Catholic Church, in Sykesville. Because I was invited by the priest who was being made dean. And I wasn't a dean yet. I said, oh, you poor son. So, anyway, I go down. He invites me. I said, you know, I cannot serve with you, and I won't. He said, but of course I'll come to the dinner, and, you know, which is fine. So we went to the house first, and the Metropolitan was there. And he said, I know your cousin. I said, yeah, he's one of the people that led the Uniatism to the Orthodox Church. He says, yeah, I know. He said, I was there. He said, you've heard the story. I said, yes, I did. From him. And he told me the same thing, so I know from both sources it's correct. And he left. He says, you know, we're having the Meholick. He said, you're welcome to join us and serve in the altar and put on the good regalia. I said, what am I going to do? He said, you're going to say, no, I tell you what I will do. I will reverently stand, not in the altar. I'll stand in the sacristy and I'll look out at y'all and I'll eat dinner with you. I said, but I'm not serving. I knew your answer. He said, and if you would have said yes, I would have been very disappointed in you. How do you like that? So, he knew what was right. And I even knew, and this Uniatism is long gone now too, but he had a little icon of St. Alexis Toth on his table of oblation. I said, Father, I am not kidding. He says, I know. I said, well then why don't you get on board? I said, you know the whole parish here. My father's dream, he came from there. I said, we'll get a gallon of prison, we'll get the bishop here, and we'll just go to town, you know. He said, I can't do that. I said, I wish you would. I said, but the offer stands, you know. Because they put, in that church, what I showed you, they put the icons back, they put the icon screen back. You walk into it and you say, oh, Pravoslavi, this is Orthodox. Very nice. I said, you know you're all set. You're all set for when you come back to the faith. And they laugh. And but a lot of people, myself included, but other people from there, started St. Nicholas Mission. Much like Father Alexis started with Uniatism, and then our mission church, we had Greeks and Carpatho-Russians and whoever came our way to start the mission. So now we have, and so many catechumens and converts that have come and have been members of the church, and our congregation is growing, our years is growing. We have a lot of people. Now, I don't want to keep it too long, so I'm going to questions. If you don't have any.
So, Father, I don't know, maybe you have an answer on this, or maybe it's speculation. You know, it's pretty widely understood that, you know, among Catholic media, internet personalities, people that do YouTube, people that do even some more of the traditional media and whatnot. But perhaps even a majority of them attend Eastern Catholic services. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's because when Vatican II happened, as was basically Pope John Paul II said himself, he said they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. They lost a lot of their traditions, and that's why he started it by saying, go back to, start putting your iconostasis back, start having your pre-sanctified liturgies, start, and then when Francis came out, remember Francis was, when he was a cardinal, what was his name, secular name, but cardinal, during the Second Vatican Council, he was against a lot of the things that they did in the Roman Church. He was very much against it, and he had a whole faction that was against Pope Paul VI, who inherited that council. And he said, you're going too far with all of this stuff. Ratzenberg.
Oh, you're talking about Benedict.
Yeah.
You said Francis.
Oh, no, Benedict, yeah. No, Francis did the thing, but Benedict started. But Benedict also was on the heels of I think he was forced to retire, frankly. And so, but Francis, he made the edict, he said, you go back. But this was Benedict said about, but it was really started by Pope John Paul II. Oh, by the way, our Archbishop Carrillo was a friend of his, was roommates in Bern, Switzerland.
Wait, what?
Our Archbishop Carrillo,
Like the former Archbishop of Western Pennsylvania.
our Archbishop in the 40s, he was in a Bulgarian monastery. He was out. Then he was sent to finish his education in Bern, Switzerland after the war. Karol Wojtyla was one of his friends and roommates. And he goes, as Kirill explained, he says, and I was a better skier because he broke his leg skiing and I did not. So yeah, Karol Wojtyla and Archbishop Kirill were friends. Now, there was a father, Wojtyla, who's passed on now. He was in our diocese, and he was also first cousin to the Orthodox.
No kidding.
He was Polish, can be.
Was Archbishop Kirill, was he raised in the Uniate tradition as well, or he was Orthodox?
He was Orthodox when he was 12. He was orphaned, and his brother, and I think he had 2 sisters. But they were orphaned. He went to Serbia to the orphanage home, and one of the people that took care of him as a young man was St. John of Shanghai in San Francisco. He said he would come and tuck them in at night and say prayers. And as it turned out, when Vladika Kirill was ordained, was Karotinina consecrated bishop, one of the 3 bishops was St. John of Shanghai. Wow. He was in the road court. So, he had a very big relation, Bitol, Serbia, where he went. So when he was sensing the icon, he blessed an icon of St. John in black, and it'll go on the wall. It's down the iconostasis because Father Samuel was a priest there. He said, put St. John again. Okay, well, there are going to be all saints of North America. We wanted them, yeah, put him in there for now. Years. Anyway, Kirill was sensing, he looks at the eye, that's what he looked like in Bitol. He says, and he sensed it, and he says, Father Mark, did you do this? I said, yeah. He said, okay, now from now on, any icon of St. John you have to do. I never did it. Wow, I did other ones. I think there's one here, right there. That's similar to the one I did, only full length. For St. John. Yes, we had a lot of roots, but Archbishop Kirill was, another thing he didn't tell us, which he did, was him and some other Bulgarian priests and bishops, they saved the entire village in Bulgaria from the Nazis. They saved the Jews from the Nazis. And how he did it was ingenious. You can read that if you can. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette had the articles where we all read it. We said, "You never said that you did all this." He said, "Nobody ever asked me." Well, what happened? He was only in his 20s. He was already Catholic. Okay? In Bulgaria at a monastery. And so the rabbi comes to him and some of the priests and the bishop. He says, "We know the Nazis are coming. They're going to take us away. We don't have time. Where do we go? How do we hide?" It was easy. He said, "Hide in the open. Bring your women to church. They wear babushkas, and bring your kids. The men all have beards. They said, we'll put robes on them and have them walk around. And they'll be all Orthodox monks." So, the Nazis came and they said, "As the Jews," they go, he says, "I don't, okay, look at that pass, they went up over that way." So they go the wild goose. "You will go to place in camp if you off they go, and they never came back. So he was given an award by some group, I don't know what they were, but there was in Mount Lebanon, it was in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, they got this award. And we said, "Wow, you could have gone to the, well, like St. Nicholas Ojicha did in the Patriot of Serbia, he went to the park. And he could have gone, it could have been his fate too, but they didn't catch him." But anyway, he was an incredible person. But we didn't know that he was also, at one time, roommates with the Pope of Rome. You know, and where we found that out was when Father Gabrusi had his 60th anniversary. He was in the Dean program. He was in Central City, and the Roman Catholics let us use their hall, because our hall wasn't big enough in Central City. So it was also his 60th anniversary of his wedding. So Matushka was there, Kirill was there, and so you had all these Roman Catholic priests, and Kirill gets up, he speaks, and he says, "I bet I know somebody you don't know, or I bet I know somebody you know, but I know him better." And they said, "Who?" And they said, "You're." And then he explained the story how he knew the Pope and how he was a classmate and all that business. He said, "Oh, well, you couldn't convince him to be Orthodox back then." No. Well, what can you do? But anyway, any other questions? I don't want to keep this too long.
So, in the Latinization of the Byzantine churches here in America, was there any push to try to get them to use a wafer as opposed to a risen loaf?
No, there was not. And I'll tell you a personal story about that. We always had when I grew up, and well, I found this was in this book. Now, this was my first Holy Communion. That's me. Teacher's looking at me, and this girl was not smiling, Miss Lenny Buckich, because I kept going this behind her. Around ears. So, if you see the teacher, she's glaring at me, and Lenny's not smiling anymore, you see. But see, this is after the iconostasis. There's my brother Chris, by the way. Chris, and that's me, Mr. Smart. There's the precede of the Byzantine vestments. But this was First Holy Communion, so in 1969, I believe. That's little me in trouble. I heard what she was a big one. She would give me a walk and pinch. Doing this behind her. So, anyway, but we received communion, but you would kneel down on this solea. You can't see it, but you would kneel down on this, and then the priest would come and he would give you communion.
Do they do it on the spoon?
Not, yeah, on the spoon with the wine and bread, just like we have in a chalice, same thing. Only, they didn't do like the proskymedia like we do. They would have, everything would be, the nuns would make it and send it, and I guess everything was cut up in cubes. I mean, he did some prayers, but he didn't, I think he did the lamb, but then that was the priest ate the whole thing, and then the people would get I was already pre-cut. I remember that, but it was the bread and white on a spoon and a chalice. So in third grade, I went to public school. I was in third, my brother was in fourth, and the teachers had a strike. It was already near, it was the shortest year I had, it was great. And it was like October, end of October already, they weren't, and my parents said enough, and we were still Byzantine Catholic. And they said, you're going to St. Mary's School up in Reynoldsville, which is only a few miles away, and they had a bus. So we started, and the nuns taught every grade. Full width, Sister Gerarder, and Sister Mary Daniel, and a bunch of, anyway, Sister Margaret Joseph. Anyway, so we go into the great church, and Monsignor Mignot was the priest. And of course, he was very stubborn. This was late 60s. He was still doing he was doing the half Latin, half English Mass, and he refused, he didn't turn around and face the people yet. He was very stubborn, because they had Vatican II, they faced the people, they still have the high place, they go up and get the community, but not Mignot. But he would come and I would read along, but I thought we would have, when we had a feast day, or like we have on Sunday, you have bread antidoro afterwards, or in the Byzantine Catholic Church, they call it mirovania. When you have the oil for a feast day, then they would give us bread to pass out. And the priest would give us a quarter or something for serving. But anyway, I didn't know what the host was. I had no idea. Because to me, that was something, and they would put it in your mouth. Now they can get it in their hands, or the priest, they can do either one in the Roman Church. But anyway, I go up. I'm just in third grade. I'm going up. And I've got this, every Friday they had, communion. And I was Union, so I could go to communion. I didn't know it was communion because there was no wine, it wasn't leavened bread. I thought, what's this wafer thing? So I go up, the priest puts it in my mouth, and take it out and go, IHS, what's that mean? And it's put it back, and I go to my computer. Get to the classroom, these two 8th graders come down. They said something to Sister Gerard. Well, it was 3rd and 4th grade together. And she nodded, and they picked me up on the arm and carried me in 3 flights of stairs. I don't know what it is, and I'm serious, St. Catherine's was the same way. The principal, the head man of the school was on the 3rd floor, and the office was right by the steps. You ever seen the Blues Brothers? You know what I'm talking about. And she kicks them down the steps. Because they're snotty. Anyway, she says to me, she says, which hand did you touch the Blessed Sacrament with? I said, what Blessed Sacrament?
Oh my gosh.
Smack in the mouth. What hand did you touch the Holy Host with? I said, oh, you mean the round thing? She goes, yes, what do you think it was? I said, this one. She took the ruler instead of the flat side, she turned, boom. She wrote it up, she takes this home to your father. She goes, what's your parish? And your priest is going to be notified. I said, Holy Trinity Byzantine Greek Catholic Church. She said, what? I said, Holy Trinity Byzantine Greek Catholic Church, Father Michael Mokris, priest. She goes, oh, one of those. She said, well, you're only half Catholic. You're all Catholic. And so she sent a very nasty note. My father read it. He was very upset. He went out and talked to Father Young. He said, we are not second-rate Catholics. Number one. Number two, why don't you give wine with your bread? It said, this is my take, eat, this is my body, take, drink, this is my blood. Well, that opened a whole new can of worms. So, now when my family decided to be Orthodox and left the Uniatism Church, I was in 8th grade, my brother was in 9th, so I was in the St. Catherine's School. And then I remember Sister Dolores, I was out in the hall for something, as usual. Anyway, she goes, why are you? I'm going to talk, it's best. Corporal punishment was all the rage with the Roman times. They protracted, they had all kinds of rules they hit you with and stuff. She goes, I heard your family became Orthodox. I said, yeah. She goes, well, it's your parents' fault. Well, you might not go to hell, but they certainly will. Yeah. I said, okay, sister, thank you, sister. Whatever. You didn't argue with the nuns. But that was the atmosphere that we had letters from the priest, Bishop Joe, and the letter said they're not to take communion anymore. They'll follow the rules and they'll go to mass, but they're not to take communion. The priests understood, but I don't think the nuns did. They were kind of. And they didn't even like us being Greek Catholic, let alone Orthodox. Like, oh, how much lower than the totem pole could you go down? So, yeah, that's how it was. But it was sort of like, and ironically, even today, so the church that we bought was St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Church, the Lithuanian church. And the people were so happy that when the Roman Catholic Church, they began to consolidate their properties and they're having financial troubles. And we bought the church because we needed more space, we needed more parking, we needed a house.
I feel your pain, Father.
I'm so jealous.
I know.
I've been up to see your church, it's huge.
It's
I'm like,
big.
I need one of those.
You can walk right in and you can drive down to the hall and walk right in. We don't have an elevator, we wish we did, but we don't. But it's nice, but the Roman Catholics that, when I was in school, would look down at us, or they actually really they like the Orthodox now. They go, you people, you keep the old traditions, you have such a respect for your properties, there's not the animosity there was when I was growing up. There was an animosity there, but there is not now. I go to the hospitals, and for my own people are there, but how many people are their father give a blessing? So I'll take extra, like a cathedral or something. Here you go. Or I'll take holy oil for the icons. That you can give, anoint anybody. I will give them anoint them on the foot. But they go, there's the way the priest should be. The priest goes to see not the Eucharistic ministers, which they have now. Which they go and they give communion, but it's just the host, you know what I mean? But when they see this, and I go to the hospital or nursing home, there is a big respect now. It's oh, Father, give me a blessing.
I just had a question. As the Catholic Church is kind of abandoning more traditions.
Which is why they told the Byzantines to get back to being more.
Yeah, I was going to say, is the Byzantine part of the Catholic Church, starting to look towards the Orthodox? You said that now they're allowing the priests to marry and stuff, but there's a lot of other issues. I don't know
a lot
if
of
that's,
issues.
is that kind of a more conservative, wing of the Catholic Church, or?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny. Some of the people they like the Orthodox stuff better. And some of the priests that were, it's funny. Even the older, what I would call older priests now. When I was in high school, they were brought up in that sort of let's have communion on each man, and we'll use outdoor masses and all that hippie stuff. And they were brought up with that, it's okay to have mass any time, to drop of a hat and use broken crackers as opposed to, I mean, so it doesn't matter. But they were brought up in an age of the more modern post-Vatican II stuff. So they don't like traditional stuff. But it's the older, what's now the older priests don't like it as much as the younger priests coming up, they're going, wait a minute, we're missing all this stuff. And I'm telling you, the organ down at St. Catherine's is magnificent. You know, they have a big pipe organs. And the fellow that, now he's a choir director up at St. Mary's, and I went to piano lesson with him when I was a kid. And he's like a choir master, and he plays the organ. And he says the priest that was there before, I don't know about the priest now, the priest that was there before, whom I knew, he's retired, but he came from that hippie era. Like, it's okay to like play guitar, but not even the organ, that's too traditional for them. And that organ lay dormant for years, he wouldn't let anybody play it. So he retired, so this guy went and he refurbished it, he played it, and he had a concert, it was great. Then he came, now our church came with an organ. We don't use it, of course, for service, we use it all on the time. But we do exercise it. We'll go play it sometimes, but our Archbishop, who is a professional organist, as you know, he went out, and I says, you're not going to play it. He says, I'll climb the stairs.
That's
fine. And he played that. And it was Father Nikolai Breckenridge was still here. I said, why don't you play fugue in D minor or Bach? Yeah. I said, suits him. Looks like. So yeah. And when we were doing the deal on the property, of course, one senior receiver says, do you want to keep the window with beautiful stainless windows? You want to keep those, you want to keep the back, the font is big enough to put adults in. I said, you? And he said, and the organ? I said, you take that. I said, the bishop says keep the organ. I said, any one of those things is it's no deal. He said, okay, we'll keep it. Well, they couldn't get rid of it. It would cost more to remove the organ in this pipes. Now, everything's upstairs, so you don't even see any pipes in the wall. So that's not a problem. But it's a real pipe organ. And it's worth, the fellow down the street, he's praised it. He says, here's the thing. He says, it's worth $250,000, which is more than we paid for the church, much more. And he said, but to get it removed and to have a place to put it, that's the real money. He said, so nobody's going to buy it. He said, just make sure, he fixed a couple things. He said, just make sure once in a while. So on weekdays, I'll go, if I remember, I'll play it when nobody's there. Or I'll have somebody play it, one of my daughters, or this or that, enjoy yourself. But of course, we don't use it for services. It's not our tradition. We don't do it. Any more questions? Yes.
So you said that picture was of your first communion.
Yes.
Does that mean that the Uniats practice confirmation like the Catholics?
What they used to do is what they did is when you were 7 or 8, age of reason, you went to your first confession and communion. Okay? But they still baptized and chrismated right away. They didn't do when you're older, the rite of, yeah. But now, and that's another thing which wasn't mentioned here, they are permitted, now they commune infants now. And there is no first communion. There's first confession. But they do commune just like us. And that they were told to go back to that, which was a shocker for me. Because I couldn't go to communion until I was 7 or 8. And then I had to go to confession. And you have the little confessional booth. You go and they have the screen, and you kneel down. The preacher, he knew who you were, but he pretended he didn't, and then you confess your sins. What you get your penance, go save, 5 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys. And
So you guys did penances the way the Latins.
yeah, we did penance, and it was usually something, it was usually 5 Our Fathers, 3 Hail Marys, or whatever. Or if it was particularly bad, then you had to do like a whole deck of rosary or something. You had to kneel, and the longer you were there, the more your parents knew you must have did something for that. You're up there a long time, and you would have to do it immediately. But in 7th grade, I remember Father Capozelli was on one side, the girls were on one side of the church, and the boys were on the other. That was the Monsignor Gooder from Ireland. Oh my God! And what did you say now? I was all over the place. You said what to who? Yeah, nothing but a clown, a class clown. Get out of my sight. I know who you are. And I want to hear 5 Hail Marys and 20 Our Fathers. Where do you go out and go? And that's it. But the Byzantine Catholics, they also bless themselves like we do. Now I have one fellow. He was Roman Catholic for years. He was raised Roman Catholic. And then when he was a couple months older than my dad, and they had a rapport. But he would come down and he would say to my dad, he would argue with him about purgatory, limbo, all these Roman things. And my dad would argue with him, and he would listen. And when he would lose the argument, he said, "Bunch of material," and he'd walk out. And he would leave. So one day, I get a call from the Union priest, because he decided, he says, "Well, you're right, the Roman Catholic Church is overboard with this and that." He went to the Union Church for years, 10 years. Okay, he was there. Meantime, my father passed away. So I get a call, maybe 2 or 3 years after my dad died. I get a call from the Union priest. He says, "I have somebody coming up the way, you're not going to believe who." I said, "The man's name." I said, "The least likely person you would think that would become Orthodox." So he said, "Bingo." I said, "You're kidding." He goes, "No." He said, "When I see he's come out, he's on his way in his car. He wants to talk to you about converting." I said, "Thanks for the heads up." So he come up, I talked to him, and I said, "How long have you been contemplating becoming Orthodox?" He says, "About 3 or 4 years." I said, "And you waited till my dad died, didn't you?" He said, "No one gave him the satisfaction." They were mates from when they were young kids, I said, "You dog." So anyway, he went through his catechism, and then the bishop said, "Yeah." He never misses a single service. Never ever. Even though he's in his 80s, he's like, he'll hobble, he'll do whatever it takes to come to the church. He said, "Well, I'm glad you got this new church," because he's an old one, he had all those steps. I said, "Yeah." He said, "I can still do it, but I can't do them now." I said, "Well, no, you can't do them now." His nickname was Mo. On his tombstone, and it was funny, he was still Byzantine Catholic when he got married, but the priest was all upset. I said, "Well, you gotta know him." But it had a beautiful cross. He's like, he'll be buried next to his parents. But it has everything on there. But then at the bottom it says, "There ain't no Mo." Jeez. Yeah. And I went and I saw it, and I said, "Yeah, there it is, that's him." Sense of humor. Well, I saw one up in the Old North Church Cemetery in Boston, and it was from the 1600s. And it had, how they had a little skull with the wings and gold. It was somebody from England. It said, "I told you I was sick." Wow. Okay. Any more questions, or we'll dismiss the class? Well, like I said, I don't want to keep it too late. I've got plenty, but we can do another.
Well, thank you very much, Father Mark, for sharing, your life and the kind of the experience of the Uniate in the United States with us. That's really a pleasure and a blessing, and thank you for speaking with us tonight.
Well,
Thank you.
and they're great people, they really
Yes.
want to do their best. Okay. Choosing to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim without defilement. Thou gavest birth to God, the Word, true Theotokos, and magnify thee. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.